U.S. officials say they're using every tool they can to stop Americans from traveling abroad to wage jihad. But those tools failed to dissuade former San Diego City College student Doug McCain, who was killed over the weekend fighting on behalf of the Islamic State, a group so brutal that al-Qaeda has broken ties with it, a group so feared the U.S. calls it the biggest threat to American security since 9/11. Joining me to talk about how and why some young Americans are lured into terrorism are San Diego State University professor Deepak Gupta and UCSD economics professor Ellie Berman, author of Radical, Religious and Violent, The New Economics of Terrorism. Professor Gupta, Doug McCain loved basketball. He was a Chicago Bulls fan. His mother was a churchgoer. He did drop out of high school. He did have run-ins with the law for petty violations. Still, how does someone like that travel to a foreign land, join a terrorist group responsible for beheadings, amputations, rapes, and public whippings?
Well, children they are not born like Rosemary's Baby with eyes turning colors when they're born. They go through transformation. Part of their lives, they look for identities as they grow up. And sometimes the search for identity, the search for doing something much larger than who they are, what their immediate personal concerns are, become all-consuming. And this is reinforced when they come across information that they know a very little about, but it's compelling. And this I find to be the common thread among all the jihadis who have gone over to fight for ISIS, al-Nusra, or any other radical groups.
Professor Berman, it's estimated that as many as thousands of people are fighting on behalf of the Islamic State, and they carry either U.S. passports or European passports. The worry is that they will eventually return to their homeland and commit terrorist acts. How big of a threat is that?
It's a threat, and I think a month ago we would have said, it's a tiny, tiny threat, don't worry about it. But I think a couple of things have changed. So let's just put this in context. Just because someone's willing to go and fight against the oppression of Sunnis in Syria or the oppressions of Sunni in Iraq doesn't mean that they want to come back to the United States and be jihadist. That's unlikely. And yet it happened, right? It happened in the French case, where someone who went over, fought with the Islamic State in Syria, went back to France and then attacked a Jewish museum in Belgium. Not only did it happen, but the French lost track of him and allowed that to happen. And so that's a warning right there. The other thing is, we didn't think that ISIS really had a problem with the West or with the United States until the beheading, the brutal, egregious beheading of a journalist, James Foley, just last week.
So what can be done to stop recruitment?
Recruitment of Americans to go do something which they think, as Deepak says, is a cause that protects Sunnis in some warped, crazy way. And I want to emphasize, it's the fringe of American Muslims who would even think that this makes any sense. And yet there are people in that fringe. What can we do about it? Probably not a lot. You know, the war with ISIS, this instability in Iraq and Syria, if we don't do something about that instability, it could be there for a generation.
So I want to talk to you about this, Professor Gupta. The Islamic State has redrawn boundaries in Syria and Iraq in a very short period of time. Does this represent an intelligence failure on the part of the United States? I mean, how did this slip beneath the radar?
Well, I don't think it's an intelligence failure. For example, the Soviet Union collapsed right before our eyes. Very few people could have predicted that the Soviet Union is going to implode like that. The Egyptian government fell apart. No, it's not really an intelligence failure. In my mind, it just happened. A lot of different factors that conspired, all the stars lined up and created this movement. And it may so happen that it can lose its momentum very quickly as well.
Professor Berman,
well,
actually this is connected to that. You know, ISIS has been described as having global aspirations. Is that hyperbole, or do you think that there's some merit to that?
I don't think they have global aspirations, but we get in their way when we start fighting for the Iraqis, and the Russians will get in their way if they start fighting for the Syrians. And so I think that there's no way that the United States cannot become involved with ISIS. And this could go on for quite a while.
And we've got to close it there. Professor Berman, Professor Gupta, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.